How's it going, everyone? John Conlon here with Neural DSP, and welcome to this deep dive on Archetype Gojira X. This is an update to our extremely popular Archetype Gojira, and it features a new and refreshed user interface, as well as updates to the devices to make it even more versatile. This plugin has been meticulously designed with Joe Duplantier, the guitarist and vocalist of the French metal juggernaut Gojira. Joe is a hugely respected guitarist whose playing embodies both technical mastery and raw aggression. He combines rhythmical precision with iconic melodies, all while delivering crushing riffs that are instantly recognizable as Gojira's sound. With Archetype Gojira X, you'll unlock Joe Duplantier's signature guitar sound. And in this video, I'll show you how this plugin works from top to bottom and help you dial in your own sounds. So let's dive in. So let's start at the pitch effects section. The first device in this pitch effects section is the wow pedal, and you'll see on the floor here I have a MIDI expression pedal calibrated to demonstrate the features of this device. The wow pedal is split into three modes. The first mode, as you'll see selected via the toggle switch, is the fatso mode. This mode allows you to blend in either an octave below or above your dry guitar signal, and that's controlled via the position of the pedal. With the expression pedal all the way back, you can have this octave below, and with the expression pedal all the way forward, you'll have the octave above. And you can control the mix of either of these two octaves via the fatso mix. So with it all the way off, you'll just hear the dry guitar signal. But bringing this in, let's bring it halfway, you'll get a 50-50 blend of your dry and the octaves. And with it all the way up, you'll just get the wet octaves. The second mode of operation for this wow pedal is blade 1. Here, this is the middle position for the toggle switch. And this allows you to transpose the guitar up an octave as you depress the pedal forwards. You'll notice here that we can't control the mix of the dry-wet, as the fatso mix was only specific to the fatso mode, and that's just something to bear in mind here. Similarly, on blade 2, this is going to be the exact same as blade 1, apart from this is now going to be 2 octaves up. And then finally, you can either enable or bypass this wow pedal with the foot switch at the bottom right. As you'll see, the three modes on this wow pedal allow it to be a very versatile device, and on top of that, it's a very integral feature of Gojira's sound. The second device in the pitch effects section is the octave pedal. And it's a very simple pedal. We've only got 3 dials. But first, let's turn it on with the foot switch. And the top left dial is octave 1, and at the right there, we have octave 2. This is going to be independent gain controls for either an octave below, which is octave 1, or 2 octaves below, which is octave 2. And turning these up or down is going to control the level of those 2 octave signals. The third parameter, this one in the middle, direct level, is going to control the mix of your dry guitar signal. With the current settings, I have octave 1 at 50%, as well as direct level. So we're going to have an equal blend of the octave below as well as our dry guitar signal with no octave 2 signal. So here's how that sounds. We can increase the level of octave 1. We could bring down the level of the direct signal. So now, in a similar fashion, let's do the same thing with octave 2. So I'm going to bring octave 1 all the way off, so you'll have none of that octave below. Let's bring direct level back to noon, so now we'll have a standard dry signal in there as well. And with octave 2, let's now bring that to 50% as well. So what you're going to hear is the dry guitar signal with 2 octaves below that as well. And this is more of a kind of texture. It's not a very audible effect unless you really dial it in, which you will in a minute. It's just going to give that low end girth and weight to your distorted guitar sounds especially. So let's bring this in a bit more, all the way up. So this is still going to have the direct signal, but now all of the mix of octave 2, so 2 octaves below. And just so you can hear that second octave below, again, 24 semitones below the pitch of my guitar, let's duck out the direct level and you're just going to hear that 2 octaves below. So as you probably heard, with 2 octaves below, it can get very almost uncontrollable, especially when using high gain. So you may want to dial this in, as I currently have, for different parts that are a bit higher register. So what I've got currently is octave 1 just above 50%, so a healthier level of that, as well as octave 2. And they're going to be at similar levels and almost overtaking the direct level. As you'll see, the direct level is at 50%. So what you're actually hearing is more of the octave signals. So crucially, this octave 2 is still going to regain some clarity and definition even when using a higher gain sound. That covers it for this octave pedal. This device alone gives you access to a huge range of low-end heavy metal tones. As you can imagine, you can then combine these two devices to either thicken up your sound with the lower and higher octaves, or completely transform it with these vivid pitch effects. And just to quickly demo that, I've pushed both of these pitch effects to the extreme. On the wow pedal, I've set it to fatso mode and blended that just a bit over 50%. And on the octave pedal, I have a healthy level of both octave 1 and octave 2. So that's 1 and 2 octaves below my drive signal, as well as a healthy amount of the direct level, and that's all the way up. And this is pushing these to the extreme in the sense that when the wow pedal is all the way back, that's then feeding an octave below into this octave pedal as well. So you're getting a very broad range of octaves at play here. That wraps up the pitch effects section of the plugin, and these two devices are a standout feature of Archetype Gojira X, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun dialing in some sounds with them. Now we're on to the pre-effects section. In this section, we have 4 devices before we hit the amps, and we have an overdrive, a distortion, a phaser pedal, as well as a chorus. Taking a look at the first device, the overdrive, let's turn this on with a foot switch, and we have a distortion, level, and tone dial. Before we engage the first pedal, the overdrive, here's how my guitar tone sounds. And then engaging the overdrive with the current settings, sounds like this. So in its current default setting, that's boosted the amp, it's rolled off some of that low end and given the amp a bit more drive and oomph. And what we could do is push this even further. Let's give it more saturation with the distortion. We've got loads on tap here, all the way up. It brings us almost into that lead territory. We could dial this back to just around 9 o'clock. We could darken it up with the tone, so towards the left we'll have a darker sound. Or a brighter sound, if this is all the way up. And double clicking that just to reset it to noon. Using the level control, we could then bring this back to give the amp less signal and clean up a bit. Even further if we want. Get a bit more articulation that way. Or we could push the amp even further, raise this level, and get more saturation and gain out of the amp. And that rounds up the overdrive pedal. As you can hear, it's a very flexible tool for filtering and saturating your guitar signal before you hit any of the other pedals or the amplifier. Onto the second device in the pre-effects, we have the distortion pedal, or dirt, as you'll read at the bottom there. And engaging this, we've got 3 dials again. We have distortion, volume, and filter. And with the distortion pedal bypassed, sounds like this. And with it engaged with the current settings, it sounds like this. So the first dial, distortion, is going to determine the amount of saturation applied to the guitar signal. And this is going to be of a different flavor to the overdrive pedal. It's going to have more of a distortion character, yes, but almost a fuzz, because this is kind of the character that this pedal has. So you'll notice with it dialed back, it's going to be more of an overdrive, slightly driven character. But as I increase the gain, we almost have a fuzzy, thicker sound with the distortion all the way up. The next parameter is the filter dial. So this will control the amount of high frequencies filtered out of the signal, essentially. I've centered everything, and what I'm going to do is just bring the distortion back to make this filter control a bit more obvious in its effect. So if I increase the filter dial all the way up, this will round off some of those high frequencies and make it slightly darker in character. But if I then bring this back to 50%, you'll get a bit more of that pick attack and a bit more of an aggressive start to each transient. If I bring this all the way, you'll then hear all of that brightness from the transients come through. So I've now centered the distortion and filter dials to move on to the volume. This will allow you to, again, similar with the overdrive pedal, either clean up or drive the amp a bit harder. So bringing it back to around 9 o'clock, we'll get a lower gain type sound. Back to midday, we'll get a bit more drive. And pushing it all the way, we'll get a lot of drive. So now you've seen the various parameters of this distortion pedal, let's dial in a few sounds. Starting with a tight, articulate, but quite low gain in comparison rhythm sound. So what I'm going to do, bring back the distortion and tighten it up a bit. With the filter, I'm also going to bring that back, not all the way because I don't want it to be too bright, but I want it to be nice and articulate and get all of that bright end transient through. And I'm just going to leave the volume at noon, so there's a healthy level of signal going to the amplifier. And it sounds like this. Now I'm going to do a warmer, almost sludgy, fuzzy type distortion sound. So let's bring the filter all the way up, make it more rounded in the top end, bring in some distortion, and maybe push the volume even as well, just so we're really driving that amp. So as you can hear, this distortion pedal can take you from the extremes of tight and articulate, high gain, bright rhythm sounds, all the way to the looser, sludgier end of fuzz distortion as well. Onto the third device in the pre-effects, we have a phaser pedal. And this is a very simple pedal. We just have one dial and it's going to control the rate of the phaser effect. Gojira, of course, are renowned for their use of phaser in their guitar tones, and this device captures that effect perfectly. So with the phaser pedal with the rate at noon, it sounds like this. I'll just turn it on with the foot switch. Let's bring back the rate all the way to its minimum, and that sounds like this. You'll hear there that the sweep of the phaser is a lot slower, and in contrast, all the way up, sounds like this. So it can get very vivid and almost seasick if you want to as well. Maybe let's dial it in with about 75%. As you can hear then, this phaser pedal has automatically taken our guitar tone into that Gojira territory, and you can use it to take your guitar sound anywhere from that subtle vocal modulation type effect all the way to the more intense phaser sounds if you wish. Finally, we get onto the fourth device in the pre-effects. We have a chorus pedal, and we have 4 different parameters on this device. We've got rate, depth, feedback, and mix. Just as a reminder, before I engage this pedal, here's how my guitar sounds without the chorus pedal. Turning it on with the foot switch, here's how it sounds with all of the default settings. Starting at the top left of the pedal, we have the rate dial, and this, similar to the phaser pedal, will control the rate at which, in hertz, the chorus pedal is modulating. And to demonstrate this chorus pedal, I'm just going to bring up the mix slightly above noon, just so you can hear this audibly. And with the current settings, let's start at the rate. Currently this is set around 9 o'clock, so this is going to be a very subtle chorus effect with loads of scope to dial it in a bit more. So this will be a lot slower in nature. As we increase this, the rate at which the chorus modulates the pitch will increase, and this is going to become a lot more obvious and evident and a lot more vivid as a result. Again, this is only halfway, so we can push this even further and get into that very seasick, almost over the top territory. And that's obviously a bit extreme. Gojira aren't known to use chorus in this way typically, so let's dial this back to something a bit more musical, about where it was set initially, and let's have a look at depth. This dial can control the amount of pitch modulation that the chorus effect has, so with it towards the left you'll have a very subtle chorus effect with not much pitch difference. As you increase this towards noon, at around 12 o'clock, you'll get more of an evident chorus effect. And as you bring this all the way in, you'll get the most vivid chorus pitch depth. So now let's set that back to noon and move down onto the feedback dial. And this feedback dial controls the amount of signal fed back into the chorus effect. And at higher values, it will sound more like a flanger. So currently, with it around 9 o'clock, you'll get less of this effect. Let's increase it. And with it all the way in, you're going to start to hear this flanger type modulation effect. So let's bring this back to noon by double clicking it. And then finally, on the right at the bottom, we have the mix dial. And this is going to control the dry wet mix of your guitar and the wet chorus effect. With it all the way off, you'll just hear the dry guitar sound. But now, if we bring this in to noon, 12 o'clock, you'll hear 50% dry guitar signal, 50% wet chorus effect. And all the way up, you're going to hear 100% chorus affected signal. So the mix dial on this chorus pedal can then come in very handy when dialing in your sound. Gojira typically use their chorus effect as a subtle enhancer to their guitar sound, whether that's increasing the width and presence of a thick rhythm sound or adding a bit of interest and character to a more modulation-based soundscape effect. So I've dialed in a sound with all of these pre-effects, and starting at the overdrive pedal, I've got the distortion and tone all the way off because I don't want this to be aggressive. I just want this to kind of sculpt the guitar sound going into the amplifiers. So the distortion's all the way off, as well as the tone to darken it up, and the level's just below noon to still give us a lot of headroom to push it with the distortion pedal. So with the overdrive pedal bypass, sounds like this. With the overdrive pedal engaged, just cleans up the low end a bit and makes it nice and tight. Then with the distortion pedal, I left the distortion around noon to give it a bit of push and saturation. The filter is all the way up again to give it a nice dark, almost fuzz-like character, but not to have it too aggressive and bright with the transients. And then the volume again is backed off because it didn't need that extra gain because there's so much coming from the amplifier. Without the distortion pedal, sounds like this. With the pedal engaged, it's now got that warmer distortion character. Next to that, we then have the phaser. It's just left at noon. It sounded great where it was. Without that, sounds like this. With the phaser engaged, did the trick very nicely. Next to that, we then have the chorus pedal. And this is used just to add that extra layer of sonic interest, give it some nice width, and just a bit of subtle modulation just to round it off. The rate is just below noon, so nothing too intense. And the depth, again, is at noon, just to add that extra kind of sonic interest, like I say, but not give it that seasick effect that chorus can have if you dial it in too much. The feedback is around 9 o'clock, so nothing too intense there, and the mix is just below noon to give it enough of the chorus effect to make it audible, but not too much to make it overbearing. Without the chorus pedal applied, it sounds like this. And with the chorus pedal engaged, so this pre-effects section can be another tool to add an extra layer of sonic interest to your guitar sound, whether that's a thick rhythm sound or an expressive vocal modulated lead sound. These pre-effects, I'm sure, can do the trick very nicely. Now let's move on to the amplifier section. In Archetype Gojira X, we have 3 different amplifiers. Amp number 1 is a clean amplifier. Amp number 2, the Rust amp, is going to be great for crunch and distortion sounds. And amplifier number 3, the Hot amp, is going to be excellent for high gain, saturated rhythm and lead sounds. Starting at amplifier number 1, the clean amplifier, it sounds like this with all the controls set as they show on the screen. So you'll be able to hear there, the character of this amp isn't crystal clean with infinite headroom. It's got a bit of breakup when you drive it, especially with humbuckers and higher output pickups. Starting at the far left, we have a bright switch. So this is just going to add a bit of a treble boost to make it a bit brighter, bring out the transients and the pick attack. So here's how that sounds with it engaged. Bypassed. And brought in. So you'll hear there, it just adds a bit of driving force to those transients when you pick. Let's disengage that for now, and then we get to the gain dial. This is going to be obviously a gain control where you can adjust the amount of saturation applied to the signal, and it's a very flexible control in the sense that you can determine the amount of breakup that the amplifier has. So bringing this back to around 9 o'clock. You'll hear there where I go to a middle position, have 2 pickups, and don't play too hard, that when you bring that gain back, it really cleans up nicely. But if you dig in on a bridge pickup, say, you can hint at that breakup character as well. And this is going to be a lot easier to achieve if you push this gain, so bringing it back up to midday. Maybe even further, let's bring it to 3 o'clock. And now we're getting into the pushed clean breakup crunch territory. But if you push that gain even further, you can get that breakup, almost bluesy-esque lead sound. And when I go on the bridge pickup, it opens out and it's got quite a lot of saturation on top as well. So you'll be able to hear there that this gain dial is crucial in determining how much the amp breaks up. And this can be ideal for crafting very clean, crystal clean sounds, as well as the more crunch breakup territory that Gojira are known for with their clean and atmospheric textures as well. Now let's move on to the bass control. So let's put the gain at noon. With the bass, again, at noon, sounds like this. Let's bring this bass dial back and it will thin out, all of that low end will reside and it will become a lot thinner as a result. Now conversely, let's push it. So you'll hear there, this is thickening out the low end, and if you were using a single coil equipped guitar, this may be really handy if you felt the tone was a bit thin. And now we move on to the mid dial. This again is a tone shaping feature and it can affect the character of the amplifier. So let's bring this back and scoop it and see how it affects the sound. It should make it nice and hollow and almost accentuate the bass and treble. Let's push it all the way. So you'll hear there that when I maxed it all the way, it almost gave the amplifier a bit more energy and push in the mid-range, and you heard it saturate and sustain a bit more on the longer drawn-out chord. As opposed to when the mids are at the minimum value, and it sounds like this. You'll hear there that the mids can just give the amplifier a bit of a push, which again can be useful if you're using single coil equipped guitars. So now let's center this mid control and moving on to the treble. Again, here's how it sounds with the current position. Let's bring this off. And what this is going to do is round out the top end, make it warmer and darker, and shave off some of those higher brittle frequencies. So it's lost all of its pick attack, all of its kind of transient detail, and sounding very woolly as a result. So let's now bring that back to midday. So you can use this to tame some of the brighter guitars. Again, if you're using single coils, it may be too bright, so you may want to tame some of that with this treble. But as we're using humbuckers in this Les Paul here, let's push it a bit to around 3 PM. And now it's got a lot brighter. Maybe if you had a middle position type sound, so with a neck and bridge pickup, you may want to use the treble to brighten up the sound. So if it was at noon, it sounds like this. So now let's bring in this treble all the way, and it should brighten up this darker guitar sound. And then finally we get onto the output dial of the amplifier. And this is going to control the overall volume outputted from the amplifier. So maybe if you were clipping at the top right there, you can bring this back and attenuate the level, or vice versa. If you had a weaker signal, just push this output a bit and then you'll have a healthy signal out of the amplifier. Now we move on to amplifier number 2, the Rust amplifier, and this is going to be ideal for aggressive, crunchy rhythm sounds of medium to high gain, and you can even push this amp into lead territory as well. With all of the settings at noon, it sounds like this. Starting at the left of the amplifier, we have the gain dial. So, similar to amp number 1, this is going to control the amount of saturation coming from the amplifier. This amplifier has a lot more on tap, so you've heard it at midday. Let's bring this back to around 9 o'clock. It's going to clean up and become less saturated and almost like a pushed, clean, mid-gain crunch type sound. You can then push this. Let's push it to around 3 or 4. You can immediately hear there the character change. It's got a lot more saturation, the EQ's change, it's got a lot more low end, and it's generally just become a lot more aggressive. So that gain control, again, a really flexible control. Moving on to the bass dial, this is part of the EQ section of the amplifier, again, a bass, middle, and treble. Let's bring this bass control back and take away some of that low end. That's made it nice and tight at the low end, so with the tight percussive stuff. And it focuses the sound a lot more in the low end there. If we pushed it, we're going to get a lot more of that hefty low end and that low end kind of rumble in the sound. Moving on to the mid control, I'm just going to put bass at noon again. Bringing the mids back, we're going to get that classic metal scooped type sound. But now let's bring this mid control to around 3 p.m. So now this has got a lot more mid-range to it, it's mid-focused, we've got a lot more body to the sound, and because of this mid-boost, we could even start using it for lead sounds as well. Moving on to the treble dial, let's bring the mid back and bring the treble back. So in a similar fashion to amplifier number 1, this is going to round off the top end and create a warmer distortion character. Now, if we boost this, we've got a lot more of those high mids coming through. And you may not want that if you've got a single coil equipped guitar. This may be too much, but with a darker guitar, something with humbuckers, or maybe if you're down tuning, you've got a lower register, this may be ideal to cut through the mix a bit as well. Now we move on to the master control, and this is going to have an inherent relationship with the character of the amplifier, as well as the level of the amplifier. So, currently with the amplifier at noon, sounds like this. If I push the amplifier's master and then compensate in output, what you hear there is a bit of a bump in the mid-range and a more mid-focused sound. So this is yet another control that you can use for further tone shaping if you wish. So now let's reset and put the master back at noon, and now bring the output back to where it was as well. Now let's have a look at the presence dial. This is going to affect the upper high frequencies of the power amplifier section. So with the presence at noon, sounds like this. Dialing back the presence will create a warmer sound and take off some of those upper high frequencies. However, if I then boost them, this will create a brighter, almost top-end heavy sound. So now let's bring that to noon. And similarly, with the depth dial, this will affect the low frequencies of the power amplifier section. So if I bring this back, the sound will thin out and there'll be less low end there. Now let's push this. So you'll hear there, if I just then center depth, that the presence and depth can be another added layer of tone shaping for this amplifier. You've been hearing this amplifier without any of the pre-effects engaged, but say if you were using some of the octave devices to create some more of those wild pitch effects, especially the ones with the lower octaves, then these extra EQ controls of presence and depth can really tailor that sound and focus it and remove some of that unwanted low end if it's present. And then finally, similar to amplifier 1, the output dial is a master volume control that you can either attenuate or boost the level of the amplifier with. Now we're on to amplifier number 3. This is the hot amplifier, and it's called that because we've got a lot of gain on tap. It's the most aggressive amplifier of the 3, and it's perfect, as I said earlier, for lead sounds, but on top of that, really great for high gain distorted rhythm sounds as well. With all of the settings, as shown in the default preset, it sounds like this. Starting off at the gain dial, this is going to have a lot more on tap than amplifiers 1 and 2, but you can clean it up slightly if you back it off. However, this amp really sings when you dial in the gain, so let's put it at around 3 o'clock and hear how it sounds. Next to this, we then have the bass dial. Similar to amplifiers 1 and 2, this will affect the EQ, but also the feel as a result. So we've got a lot of gain on tap here. There's a lot of low end inherent in the sound. If we bring this back, similar to amplifier number 2, that thins it out and makes it a lot more focused in the low end. If we pushed it, we've got a lot more of that bottom heavy low end presence. Next to that, we then have the mid control. We could scoop this and create that classic 80s style high gain sound. Or we could push it and get a little bit more of that modern, progressive, mid-ranged focus sound. Next to this, we then have the treble dial. Again, this can be used to round off the higher frequencies if you're using a single coil equipped guitar, something that's a bit brighter. Let's just bring that back and demonstrate this. Pushing the treble dial will enhance these high mid frequencies and create a harsher, high-end heavy sound. Similar to amplifier number 2, we then have the master dial, which will be the power amplifier's gain control. And if we push this, we're going to get a lot more of that mid-range and that mid-boost. And just to demonstrate this, as the master is currently just above midday, it sounds like this. If I then push the master all the way up and then just compensate by bringing the output down a bit, you'll be able to hear again that similar to amplifier number 2, that this master control can be a further tone shaping tool on this amplifier as well. Next to this, we then again have the presence and depth controls. These are going to affect the high and low end of the amplifier. So first looking at presence, let's dial it back and take some of that high end off. If we then push it, we're going to get a lot brighter. Moving on to the depth, let's bring this back and we'll have a lot of a thinner, less low end heavy sound. Let's push it. We're going to get a lot more of that low end in. Then we get onto the output dial. This, similar to amplifiers 1 and 2, will be an overall volume control for this amplifier. Finally, next to this, we then have the bypass switch, so you can bypass or enable the amplifier if you wish as well. That wraps up the amplify section of this plugin. These 3 amplifiers then can cater to everything from clean guitar tones to mid-gain, crunch, rhythm sounds, all the way to highly distorted, aggressive rhythm sounds, and even pushing into lead territory as well. Using these 3 amplifiers, you'll be able to faithfully recreate Gojira's guitar sound, from their crushing, heavy, monolithic rhythm sound, all the way to their modulated cleans and everything in between. Now we move on to the cab section. Here you can choose where your mics are placed, what microphones are on the cabinet speakers, as well as combine them with other impulse responses. And on top of that, you can also have a choice of 3 different cabinets in this plugin as well. So let's start off at the first microphone settings. And you'll see here that we have mirrored parameters. So what I'm just going to do now is bypass the second mic so we can hear how it's affecting just one for now. So at the top, we have 2 arrows. These are going to cycle through different mic models for this speaker. And you'll see the visuals change when you change the mic as well. Alternatively, you can go through a drop-down menu and select a mic model or load an impulse response if you wish as well. So currently we have a dynamic 57 mic, and that sounds like this. Let's choose a 184 condenser. One more, let's maybe try a ribbon 160. You'll see then each of these has a different character. Going back to the 57, we can then change the position, distance, mic level, and panning of this microphone signal. So, as I change this position dial, you'll see the microphone moves from the center of the cone towards the outside. With its minimum position, i.e. right over the center of the cone, it's going to be really bright. As I move this towards the outside of the cone, and I can also click and drag the microphone, it's going to get a bit darker. With the outside of the cone being the darkest. With the position at 0.5, I'm just going to leave it there for now to demonstrate the distance. So similarly, as you turn this, the microphone is going to get further away from the cabinet. So at 0, it's going to be nice and up on the grill. But as we increase this, the mic will get further away and you'll get a different character to the mic signal. Immediately you'll hear we've got less low end present, and then if we increase this all the way, we'll have even less. Bringing this back to 0. Below this, we then have mic level. This is just going to be an output level of this mic signal, and when we blend them, we can blend these to taste using that. And then we have the pan control. So with it all the way to the left, this is going to pan this mic signal towards the left, and then you can have a stereo mic pairing of a cabinet with the other microphone engaged as well, and we'll do that in just a second. Below this, we then have the phase invert switch. So if you wanted to flip the phase of this mic or impulse response, you can do that there as well. And whilst we're here, before we move on to the second microphone, you can see the front panel of whichever amplifier you're using. And whilst you're on this cab page, you can still change the parameters on the amp as if you were in front of the amplifier as well. Let's now go ahead and engage this second microphone. So now we've got the 57 and the condenser 414 active at the same time. We've got a lower level of this condenser, so let's just bring this back in. And because I've raised the level of the second microphone, I'm just going to duck the output to avoid clipping. And here's how both of those sound blended together. Here's just the 57. And here's just the condenser. Let's try out a few combinations. Let's add a ribbon 121. $41. And now finally, let's just do the 41, but this time, pan it all the way to the right and pan the 57 to the left. So coming out of your left speaker, you'll hear the 57, and coming out of your right, you'll hear the 421 blended together for a nice stereo cab image. So I'm just going to go ahead and center these two again by double clicking them. And I'm now going to show you that with this icon down here, you can unlink the amplifier heads and their respective cabinets, meaning you can have any head with any cabinet. So you've heard amplifier number 3 and cabinet number 3. Now if I select the second cabinet, you'll hear amplifier number 3 with cabinet number 2. And what we've got is a 57 as well as a ribbon 121 microphone. And now let's try cabinet number 1, again with the same mic settings. And now back to amp 3 and cabinet number 3 with the same microphones. So now what I'm going to do is just sustain a chord and cycle through the 3 cabinets so you can hear the differences in real time. And if you wanted to change the amplifier head whilst changing out cabinets, you can also do that with ease. Just select one there as well. Now we're on to the EQ section, and this is a 9-band graphic EQ, which is going to allow you to have further tone shaping after the amplifier and cab section. And on top of that, we've also got high pass and low pass controls as well. If I disengage the EQ using this power button at the bottom left, here is how my guitar sounds without the EQ. Now let's engage this EQ, and using the high pass filter, roll off to around 100 Hertz. And what this is going to do is remove all of the extraneous low end that can sometimes get in the way of a mix. I'll now sustain a chord, engage the EQ, bypass it, so you can hear the difference that makes. It's just rolling off that ultra low end. We can do further changes with the EQ. Maybe we wanted to duck the mid-range a bit. Let's pull out a bit of 1 kilohertz, 500 and 2 kilohertz. Here's how it sounded without the EQ. Back in. Or maybe we wanted to have a mid-range focus sound. We could boost these. Maybe roll off some of the ultra high and low end. We could do that with either the high and low pass filters or with these graphic bands. Let's do a bit of both. Let's leave that at 100. Let's push the mids a bit more. And now we should have a mid-focused lead sound. you wanted to reset the EQ, all you do is double click any of the bands and they return to 0 dB. You can also use the high pass and low pass filters in a creative way. Maybe you wanted to have a lo-fi setting where you roll off all of the low end and even some of the high end and create a megaphone type effect. So that's also possible. Alternatively, you could use it as I showed earlier on in a more subtle tone shaping way as well. Now we move on to the post effects section. The first device is a delay and the second is a reverb. These are both very flexible units, but first let's have a look at the delay. We can turn it on with this bypass foot switch at the bottom left, and with all the current settings, it sounds like this. At the top left, we have the mix dial, and this is going to control the dry-wet blend of your guitar signal and the wet delay signal. So with this all the way to the left, you'll get a much more subtle delay effect. And then as I increase this, let's put it at around 3 PM, you'll get a much more obvious, heavier mix of the delay. I'm going to leave this at around 10, 11 o'clock just so you can hear the delay as we go through the different parameters. Next to that, we then have the sync switch, and this is going to activate one of the 3 modes of the delay. In the mode with the toggle switch to the far left, you're going to be in free mode. This means that the time of the delay repeats can be set in milliseconds, as seen on the digital display, and you set the speed with the time dial. And just as a note here, because you set the milliseconds time with the time dial, the tap tempo foot switch is disabled there and grayed out. The next mode next to that will be the app or DAW mode if you're using this within a DAW. In this mode, the time dial allows you to select a rhythmic subdivision at the tempo that the DAW or application is set at. So currently, the app is set at 120 beats per minute, as shown on the digital display as well, and the time dial is set at an 1/8 note. And this means that at 120 beats per minute, the delay will repeat at the rate of an 1/8 note. We can then increase this to a 1/2 note triplet. Or we can have shorter, almost slapback type delay sounds with a 16th triplet. The third mode is the tap mode. And here you'll see that the tap tempo foot switch is now not grayed out, so we can tap in a specific BPM, and the BPM on the digital display changes. And now this means that the rhythmic subdivision is relating to this tapped in BPM, and that's the rate at which the delay will repeat at. So if I then went to a quarter note, we're now going to hear the delay repeats at quarter notes at 98.2 beats per minute. Further along to the right of this delay pedal, you'll see we have another toggle switch, and this is for the ping pong mode. Currently, we've been listening with all of these delay repeats with ping pong mode switched on. That means that the delay repeats are going to ping pong left and right around the stereo image. But now, if I turn this off, it means that all of the delay repeats are going to go straight down the middle and not have this stereo effect. And you can see whether this ping pong effect is engaged or bypass by the digital display highlighting either off or on. Next to this, we then have the feedback dial, and this will determine the amount of delay repeats. With this to the left, you'll have a smaller number of delay repeats. And then as you turn this to the right, you'll have a larger number of delay repeats. But now I'm just going to bring this back for the further demonstrations. And below that, at the bottom left, we then have the tone dial. From the left position, this tone will mean that the delay repeat's going to be darker. And then as you turn it to the right, you'll hear brighter delay repeats and they'll have more of that high end in them. So with the tone all the way to the left, here's how the delay repeats sound. Now I'll put the tone at midday. Now that tone's increased all the way, you'll hear that the delay repeats are nice and bright. And this may be useful if you had a lower register part and you still wanted that delay, but you didn't want all of the low end information in the delay repeats to get in the way of your riffs. Next to this, we then have the time dial, which we've already talked about. And next to that, we then have tape saturation. So as you increase this from left to right, you'll add some tape saturation to the delay repeats. And this can give a slight lo-fi effect that tape delay often has and is fun to experiment with. And here's how it sounds with the tape saturation around halfway. With tape saturation all the way in, you'll have a higher level of that saturation applied to the delay repeats. And when dialing in lo-fi, crunchy, mid-breakup atmospheric sounds, adding this tape saturation can be really useful of just adding another layer of sonic interest to that. And then we finally end up on the tape modulation. So this will apply modulation to the delay repeats as a tape delay often does. And again, can just add another lo-fi flavor and give a bit of modulation to the delay repeats. So with modulation off, here's how it sounds with the tape mod at midday. And with tape modulation all the way up. And once again, if desired, this can be another layer of sonic interest you can add to your wet atmospheric guitar sounds. Next, let's move on to the reverb pedal. And before we turn this on, here's how the guitar sounds. And then with the current settings, here's how the reverb pedal sounds. This reverb has 5 different parameters, and looking at the first one, we have mix. So this will be similar to the delay, a dry-wet blend of your dry guitar signal and your wet reverb signal. Currently, it's quite high, it's just below 50%, so we're hearing a lot of that reverb. If we brought it back, we'd have more of the dry signal and a more subtle reverb effect. Or you could push this and get a more in-the-room, ambient, drawn-out reverb sound. I'll bring this down just below noon for the rest of the demo. Let's go on to decay then. So this will be a control determining how long the reverb tail is. So with it towards the left, you'll have a shorter, quicker decay, almost like you're in a smaller room. As you increase this, you're going to get longer, drawn-out, soundscape type ambience. Moving down the pedal, we then have the shimmer toggle switch, and we'll get to that last. Because below that, at the bottom left, we then have a high pass filter. So as you increase this, you're going to roll off more of that low end. And with it all the way to the left, we're going to have a darker, low end heavy reverb sound. If I then raise this to around 3 o'clock, you're going to have a brighter feeling, less low end heavy reverb tail. Inversely, on the far right, we have a low pass filter. So as you bring this towards the left and turn it off almost, that's then cutting the high frequencies out and acting as a high cut or a low pass filter. So with it all the way up, we're going to have a nice bright reverb tail. But then if I bring this back to around 9 o'clock, we'll have a rounder, darker reverb tail. Finally, let's have a look at the shimmer mode for the reverb pedal. This allows you to have a pitched up reverb tail on top of your dry guitar signal. And before I show you how the shimmer mode sounds, I'm just going to move on to amplifier number 1, because these shimmer type sounds are really good for clean atmospheric parts. And again, here's how the reverb sounds without the shimmer mode engaged first. Now I'm going to engage the shimmer mode. Up to now, we've heard quite a lot of high gain, aggressive, distorted sounds, but as you can now hear, this plugin can cater to those clean, vast, ambient soundscape type sounds as well, and cover the full spectrum of guitar tone. Both the reverb and delay pedal in this post-effect section can work great together to create ambient, lush soundscapes, and I've whipped up a quick sound here to demonstrate that. So in this sound, I was really leaning into the tape modulation feature. I've got that all the way up, and especially with chords, you can hear when the chords of the dry guitar signal and the wet really clash, and you get the effect of that modulation in a really vivid way. And the mix is nice and high for that. It's quite a dark sound for the delay repeats as well, and I tried to match that by rolling some of the high end off the reverb. I brought the decay down a bit just so it wasn't too cloudy and got in the way of the chord changes. Shimmer was on, and you should have been able to hear that bloom after each chord. And again, I've got a healthy mix here, so that was all audible and very ambient. So that covers it for this post-effects section. 2 extremely versatile devices that I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun playing around with. Now let's have a look at some global features of the plugin. Starting at the top left, we have the input dial. This will control the level that your guitar hits the plugin. So maybe if you have some quieter output pickups, you can increase this to get a good healthy signal on the way into the plugin. And you don't want it clipping, and if you ended up clipping, you can just use this input dial, back it off a bit, and reduce the input level of your guitar. Next to this, we then have the gate control. By default, it's set at -60 decibels, and it's also engaged because most of the sounds inherent in this plugin are very high gain. It helps to have a gate just to clean up that noise. If I bypass it, you'll hear a bit of that noise just creep in. And you can control the severity of this gate by backing it off. And that becomes a bit of a looser gate, but if you bring it right up, you can get a very tight gate that way as well. Next to this, we then have a transpose dial. This allows you to increase or decrease the pitch of your guitar by 12 semitones, i.e. an octave below or above. So currently, I'm at 0 semitones. That's the pitch that my guitar is currently at. If I then brought this down -2, it brings the perceived pitch of my guitar down 2 semitones. I could go further. I could go -5 or 6. Or I could increase this. Let's go 2 semitones. Next to this, we then have the input mode. This allows you to select either a mono or stereo input to the plugin. For example, if you're using a keyboard or something that has a stereo output from that device, but therefore a stereo input into the plugin, you could run a stereo signal through this entire plugin using stereo mode. All you do is select that on the toggle switch. As we're using a guitar, this is a mono signal with 1 jack lead. So in mono mode, that's going to work best for this. Next to this, we then have the preset manager. Here you can see we're currently on the default preset, but above that to the top left, we have 2 arrows. We can scroll through various presets in the plugin, or we can select the preset name in this box and browse the presets made by Gojira and Joe Duplantier, as well as artist presets, neural DSP presets, and presets that you, the user, has made and saved. When you're using a preset that you've made yourself or that you're tweaking, you can choose to delete it by selecting delete, and you'll get an option there asking if you want to really delete it. Or if you make any changes to a preset, you'll see a little asterisk next to it. You can then choose to save it or save it as a specific name. Next to that, you then have 3 little dots. Selecting those allows you to then import a preset from the file directory in your computer. Next to this, reset allows you to reset all of the parameters on the devices to noon, so it's almost like a blank slate to start a preset from. And next to this, you then have locate file, and this will take you straight to the location in your file directory that the presets are stored. And if you get lost and want to reset to the default preset, all you do is select the window and click default, and you're back to square one. Next to this, we then have the doubler, and this allows you to create a stereo width to your otherwise mono guitar sound. And it does this by creating a delayed left and right signal to imitate this stereo double tracking type effect. Without the doubler engaged, it sounds like this. Let's now turn on the doubler with a 6 millisecond delay time. We could enhance this doubling effect. Let's turn it up to 14. All the way up to 20 milliseconds if we wanted. Next we get to the output dial, and this will be the overall output of the plugin. It's specific to each preset, so you can save a specific dB gain or reduction for each individual preset. And in Archetype Gojira X, the default output for the main output dial is set at +8 decibels. Moving down to the bottom left corner of the plugin, we have the tuner. Selecting that brings up the tuner window. You'll see there at the top that our tuner currently is muted. By selecting that speaker, we can hear the note that we're tuning as well. Below that, we then have a very clear visual readout of the note we're tuning to. At the bottom left, we can choose to see the cents or hertz value of our notes. Next to that, we then have an option to toggle a live tuner. So when we close this window at the bottom left of the plugin, we can see the pitch of our notes all the time. Opening the tuner back up, we can also turn this back off if we want. And then finally, we can select a hertz value to tune to. Now let's exit the tuner window. Next to this, we then have the MIDI menu. Selecting this brings up all of our MIDI mappings, and if you've assigned any external expression pedals or devices to control the parameters in the plugin, all of that information will show up here. Almost all of the features within this plugin can be controlled with MIDI, so you could use this in a live setup or in a studio setup and change these with automation if you wish as well. Next to this, we then have the tap assignment. So selecting that at a specific BPM will change the BPM of the plugin globally. Or alternatively, you can click here and type in a BPM if you wish as well. Next to this, we then have the metronome page. When opening up this metronome page, you'll see we have the volume of the metronome that you can change. We also have the time signature that the metronome can click in. We have an option of sounds that you can hear the metronome use. We can then pan the metronome left or right in the stereo field if we want as well. Below that, we've then got the BPM, and this is going to be the same BPM assigned at the bottom of the plugin. So if we change this to a tap value, when we open up metronome, you'll see that it's matched in the metronome page as well. But we can also tap it within the metronome page and change the rhythm of the beats to a quarter note, eighth, triplet eighth, or 16th note. Below this, we then have the icons for each of the beats of the metronome, and clicking through these can change the different tones of the metronome clicks. Here, I'll just play it so you can hear how that sounds. Exiting the metronome page with the X allows us to then turn off and on the metronome with this play button. Next to that, we then have settings, and bringing this up allows you to configure your audio inputs and outputs, as well as your sample rate, audio buffer size, and also configure any MIDI input devices if you wish to control parameters of the plugin with MIDI. And it's worth noting that the tap, tempo, metronome, and settings at the bottom of this plugin window are only available when using the plugin in standalone application mode. And then at the bottom right of the plugin, we have two arrows that allow you to select the size of the plugin window. So now let's have a look at some artist presets included in the plugin. This preset is by Charlie Griffiths and it's called Grogu's Trance. It's a really nice, luscious ambient preset that makes use of the shimmer on the reverb. This preset is by Charlie Robbins and it's called Creepy Wurlitzer. It's a brilliant clean preset that utilizes the phaser and chorus in the pre-effects. This preset is by Forrester Saville and it's called Straight to the Top. It's a great octave fuzz type sound utilizing the wow pedal in the pitch effects. This preset is by George Levitt and it's called Drop E. And since we've got a transpose function on Archetype Gojira X, I'm going to do just that and go -12 semitones, and now I'm in Drop E. This preset is by Joshua Della Victoria and it's called Crystal Clean, and it's a really nice, bright, vibrant, clean sound with good use of the delay and reverb in the post effects. This preset is by Nolly and it's called Junkier for the Chunky. It's a really nice, thick rhythm sound. This preset is by Rabia Massad and it's called Crunchy Leads. We're currently on Amp 2, which is brilliant for those crunchy breakup lead tones. This preset is by Stephen Jones and it's called Radio EQ. This is a great high gain rhythm preset, but he's utilized the EQ section to carve out some of the low and high end to get that mid-focused radio sound. This preset is by Justin McKinney and it's called Bendy. It's a great lead preset that utilizes Amp 3 and all of its saturation and sustain. This preset is by Neural DSP and it comes loaded with the plugin. It's called Enough Gain Rhythm because it definitely has enough gain, and we just utilize an Amp 3 here for a nice thick rhythm sound. So that wraps up this deep dive of Archetype Gojira X. This meticulously crafted plugin faithfully recreates the iconic sound of Joe Duplantier from Gojira, allowing you to unleash the crushing tones that have made them a force to be reckoned with in the world of metal. With 3 impressively capable amps and a range of unique pre- and post effects, I'm sure you'll discover a new world of inspiring heavy tones. For more information, head on over to neuraldsp.com. I've been John Connon, thanks for watching.